No Rick either.
Rick is coming back from San Diego. Everybody's in California, I guess.
Wow.
Well, he sounded so.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
A couple more minutes. Yeah, he was at the National Planning Conference, so the
Oh, that's probably cool.
American Planning Association conference down there. So
And last I talked to him, he's pretty invigorated. So
Lots of great ideas.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Don't you hate when the boss does that though? Then he comes back and he's like, rah, rah, let's go.
And they try to infuse that energy into
Yeah.
you and you're like, I wasn't there.
I
It
wasn't
just doesn't
there.
feel the same. But we trust you. Appreciate all the good notes.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
And
started. Just wait till 6, just to make sure.
I'm going to call the meeting of the May 3rd Planning Commission to order. I think that we should approve the agenda. Is there an motion actually to approve the agenda and the consent items?
so moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Is there any public, are there any public members out there? Members of the public, I should say.
Someone named Brandon Caps.
Yeah, there's one attendee out in the virtual audience. We don't have anybody here at City Hall. If the one attendee in the audience would like to make a public comment to the Planning Commission, this is your opportunity to do that. Just use the raise hand function if you'd like to make a comment, and we can bring you into the meeting. Going once, going twice. I don't see any raised hands, so go ahead and move forward.
Okay, we'll move on to commission member reports. If anyone has a report, this would be the time. I personally do not, but what about you?
I do not.
You do not.
I didn't have a report, but Brian, I was wondering if, I just wanted to mention something that from last meeting, I was really thinking about, not necessarily that particular apartment, but I remember you telling us previously, like when we had single family homes, how little land there was available for those kinds of things and how the rest of the city available land was zoned. And I continue to be very, very concerned about us not having alternatives between single family homes and apartments and just only, that's our only multifamily. And I was wondering if maybe you or anybody can tell us what land is available at multifamily. Or do we run the risk of building so many apartments that when other options become available, we don't have any land left for that? And I just was driving around the city and seeing just more apartment buildings going up that I hadn't realized were there. And it just seems that's all we've got going these days. And so I was wondering if you can give us some more information. So either I can move off of this topic or but it left me with a wonder and doubt and needing more information. So obviously not for tonight, but something.
I'll add it to a future work program item and put it on the calendar. It's been some time since we have updated the available land. That's the last time we did that was in our comp plan. And so what I'll need to do is to check with Thurston Regional Planning Council. They're the ones that kind of keep track of that and see where we're at as far as the buildable lands report goes. And I might be able to share some of the findings of that. That'll tell us what's out there and what's buildable and at what level. So whether that's single family or something that's more dense. You know, we have, just so everybody's aware, we've done some recent annexations that actually have brought in some developable residential, single family residential property, including Ostrom's mushroom farm is, and we've had a recent pre-submission conference on Ostrom's to convert that to a single family subdivision. And we've got some other projects that are kind of in the pipeline. You probably saw the one recently about the one next to just north of North Thurston High School. That's a single family subdivision that's being constructed by DR Horton. So not everything is apartments but I think it would be a great exercise to show the work as far as what's out there. I'm predicting that it'll show that we won't have much in terms of single family, and really with the multifamily market being so hot. And since we didn't construct any multifamily from 2007 to about 2017, that's really what you're seeing now is that pent up demand that was from, you know, the 10 years where we only did single family. So we've kind of shifted, you know, the pendulum has gone so far from one direction to the next where we used to do all single family and now we're doing all multifamily. It's pretty amazing, but I think and I think too, we'll go over some of that tonight and some of our educational stuff, like why is that and what kind of is the idea behind some of those things. But it's really going to be focused, tonight's going to be more focused on a state level and a regional level rather than Lacey specific stuff. So I think it'd be good to do a future topic and talk about maybe some permitting and some other things that we've got kind of queued up, and also talk about what's available land is available out there. So
Yeah, it previously was really helpful with that, and I know many of us have been here, but I just want to know how much is multifamily, and not necessarily do we need more of the single family, but are we going to have options when options become available for multifamily to do something other than the current trend, which is just apartment buildings. So thank you.
Period. Okay.
Yes, I do. And as I was talking with different people around the city, the concern keeps focusing on affordable housing, but also with the rents that are drastically increasing with the housing stock, and people are talking about affordability. So and questions have come up about rent control and why there is no rent control. So I was hoping that you could educate us about that issue within our group, and hopefully so that we can understand the issue better and help, advocate for the development of housing that's truly affordable. And also, we're curious about the Midtown, how right now there are incentives in place for people who build affordable housing, and to kind of have that rent stabilization to maintain its true affordability. So I was curious if you could educate if something like that would be extended throughout, or possibly considered in the future. But so hopefully you could teach us more about those items.
I added that one to the list as well. Just so everybody's aware, we have a variety, and maybe what we can also talk about is we have a variety of different programs that do provide incentives, and a lot of those incentives come with the requirement that they remain affordable in perpetuity. We always have to keep in mind, and we can talk about rent control and what that can look like, and we'll certainly pull that together as well. But a lot of our programs are from like 60% to 80% AMI. And we have a very high median income right now as well. And so it's amazing what a quote unquote affordable unit can go for. So I think we can show some of that stuff too, to kind of look at what is truly affordable. Rents are obviously skyrocketing, but a lot of affordable rents for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment are probably more than most people's mortgages, So a great topic that we can certainly come back with more information on.
Mark, any report?
Sorry about that, no report.
Okay, thanks. And Al?
No report.
Ryan, do you have any words of wisdom?
Neither Guy nor Grant have a director's report tonight, so moving along.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to Planning Commission education. There will be a quiz, so.
Just for those not here though.
Yeah, right, for those not here, yeah.
So, hopefully everybody had a chance to meet Grant in person. Grant is our Planning and Development Services Manager in the flesh. And tonight we are going to provide a little bit of a educational piece to the Planning Commission to give you some context about how Growth Management Act kind of came about. Talk a little bit about how Growth Management Act applies to Lacey and specifically what Lacey's role is within the entire county when it comes to applying the Growth Management Act. So this talks about a brief history of planning in Washington, but really we're going to focus on Growth Management Act and its applications and some of the things that we've done as a region to implement the Growth Management Act over the last 30 or so years. So we've got a little bit of a presentation, and we will have, at certain points, we will have some videos that we've queued up that we have not done. We've just poached up from other people, and then have some discussion points along the way. So if there's any questions or anything, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt at any time. This will be pretty informal, and really it's to kind of spur discussion and help some of us. Obviously, we have Plan Commission members that have been on for quite a while, but we have some others that are relatively new. And so hopefully this hits the mark as far as some good kind of background and give you some good foundation. So with that.
And Ellen, this is kind of grew out of your request to kind of look at the climate action stuff and where we're at. But before we get into details with any one program, we kind of wanted to tie everything together and kind of give the baseline for why we do what we do, how it's different than we used to do it, and kind of where we fit into that bigger picture for a lot of things like climate action, affordable housing, and all the other issues of the day that just keep recycling. So, and I got to go first. Ryan said I had to go first because I'm old. And I've been doing this for 36 years. So I was actually, didn't start in the 70s, but was in my initial professional life, that was the regulatory framework that I was working under. So I've seen all the change. So back in the 70s, the Planning Enabling Act allowed cities and counties to adopt comprehensive plans and zoning regulations. Didn't require it. And many jurisdictions didn't have zoning codes or comprehensive plans or just one or the other. And so it was kind of a mishmash. The only required regulatory scheme on the landscape was the State Subdivision Act. So we did regulate land divisions and short subdivisions, but then nothing over 5 acres. So that was all exempt. Those codes, as you might expect, were not really refined very well, and there often wasn't good criteria for when something should be approved or where it should be approved, and hence a lot of things were just conditional uses that allowed anywhere. And the way that the permit system worked was usually 3 old white guys sitting around as a board of adjustment ruling on your case, and it's like, please, sir, may I have a permit? And if they were your neighbor and you were a good person, they'd give it to you. But it was not the best regulatory scheme in the world. And as you can imagine, as developers got more sophisticated, we started losing a lot of land use lawsuits. There's a lot of case law developed out of those times. So in 1971, the state of Washington led the charge in kind of a national change to the land use. Warren Magnuson and Scoop Jackson led the charge on both NEPA and the Coastal Zone Management Act, and reflected those locally with SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, and the Shoreline Management Act. So the SEPA was adopted in 1971, and it was life-changing for planners, or at least current planners, because we could actually condition. We had the authority to condition permits based on probable significant impacts. So for the first time, we were really able to look at a project and recommend, no, you can't build in the middle of that wetland or right next to the shoreline. You have to do it in a responsible way. It was a very klutzy system because you had to fill out the checklist. We had to do an analysis of what those impacts were. We had to tie those impacts back to the development and then recommend those as part of the permit process. So we got the ability to regulate all the critical areas basically, along with the implementation of comp plans. When I started up in Clallam County, our neighbor Jefferson County had a comprehensive plan. They didn't have a zoning code. So the only way they implemented their comp plan was through SEPA. So very bizarre system. So the Shoreline Management Act was adopted about the same time. And it was really the first statewide document that required local jurisdictions to plan. It was just planning along the shorelines within 200 feet of the ordinary watermark and regulated associated wetlands. But it did require us to actually sit down and think about what should go where, and then also required us to live what we said and developed a permitting system to implement those plans. And again, that was a little bit kludgy as well, and being back in the day, but it was a nice tool. So then in the 1990s, everything changed. We adopted the state adopted the Growth Management Act. And the first part of it was thou shalt regulate, plan for, and develop standards for critical areas that are the best based on the best available science and regulate to them. So we were, for the first time, actually required to do that. So those standards got baked into our codes rather than having to be kind of made up one-off through the SEPA process as we look at. So what you see is kind of the SEPA part of it becomes less important in catching everything and more important in catching the really big things that aren't covered by those development regulations. So yeah, we protected the critical areas. The other part of the Growth Management Act, I mean, the big chunk was really about protecting three different areas, or protecting two different areas of land. First, resource lands. So mineral lands, forest lands, and agriculture were all required to be protected under the Growth Management Act. That mostly impacted counties. When I was up in Clallam County, we had a lot of timberland and a lot of 640 acre minimum lot sizes in the commercial forest. But also we were required to protect agricultural and mineral lands. The other side of that is the other opposite of the spectrum. End of the spectrum is urban lands. And that's where the cities and urban growth areas come into play. And really, we're the key to sustainable development or smart growth or whatever you want to use the latest buzzword. It all relates to GMA because we were first. So we got to make up our own buzzword. And we're the third state in the country to have adopted a statewide growth management act. But that's where, most of the growth should occur, where we can provide urban level services and infrastructure at affordable costs. We were on a path of not being able to support our population and the demands because it cost a heck of a lot more to run, a water line 10 miles out along a rural road serving the same number of people that could be living in town in an apartment complex or a condo. So that was really the gist of the Growth Management Act. We just had to be able to maintain an affordability of the infrastructure. The third category, and I note that I said there was two important ones, are rural lands. And my favorite growth board quote of all time is a Lewis County case. The Growth Management Hearings Board said, rural lands are the leftover meatloaf in the GMA refrigerator. They're not urban, they're not rural. You can't be suburban in them, but they're residential, they're farm, it's just a mixed, it's leftover meatloaf. Who knows what's in it? And that really made it difficult for counties to deal with that. There was a lot of conflict at the time on down zoning and, because in Clallam County, for example, we had a ton of 1 acre zoning, which was all suburban sprawl that we had to down zone and impact people's property rights. So one of the county commissioners at that time called the GMA the County Commissioner Dis-Election Act. I think he got reelected like 3 times. And so for the first time, the GMA tied land use patterns to infrastructure, transportation.
So how does this apply to these people down here? How does this apply to Thurston County? So as Grant mentioned, there are 3 different kind of land use types that sets forth in the Growth Management Act. The first is the resource lands. So here you can see Thurston County all in this colored area. So we have resource lands. They're mostly timberlands, primarily timberlands around Capitol Peak, Capitol Forest, as well as the area that's kind of in the southeastern corner of the county. I think most of this is commercial timberland, kind of south of Yelm out in the down south of the Clear Lake area. I don't know if it has a certain name or not. Grant, you're probably more familiar with that than I would be, but
it was not near Yelm, I'm sorry. Your scales are way off.
Yeah, so we have those. We also have our urban lands. So this includes not only the city limits of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater, but also our urban growth areas as well. So urban, in terms of the Growth Management Act, is anything that's within an urban growth area. And that not only includes Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater, but you can see on the map there as well, you can see Yelm, Rainier, Tenino, Bucota, and there is one unincorporated urban growth area at Grand Mound down by down in around the Great Wolf Lodge area. And the rest is the meatloaf. So the yellow is the rural area.
Wanna call girl?
If you can.
Sorry, David.
Dave, we just muted you. So if you need to speak up, just unmute yourself. So you can see how that kind of lays out in Thurston County, and really, the area that's to be the densest, those that provide the urban levels of services are in the cities and within the urban growth areas. We also did a process in 2013 called Sustainable Thurston, and Sustainable Thurston further kind of defined what our goals are as the Thurston-wide community for creating places and preserving spaces. That was kind of their tagline, and they realized at that point, back then we had about 250,000 residents. We're close to 300,000 now in Thurston County, but we were anticipating that there would be 120,000 new residents in Thurston County by the year 2035. They set forward targets and goals that identified, because again, we can't put people in the meatloaf and in the rural lands because that would be sprawl. And so we need to target 95% of that new population within our urban growth areas. So that's why we're seeing, not to put too fine a point on it, that's why we're seeing, what we're seeing right now is that in order to accommodate populations, they need to go within urban growth areas, because there's, number one, there's not the room or the density to be able to do that anywhere else. And as well, it also established the goals of 72% of new and existing households, so all households within a UGA, be a half mile or a 20-minute walk from a neighborhood center, an urban center, or a urban corridor. So that would be, neighborhood center would be, think of a neighborhood commercial area. An urban center would be like Midtown, or urban corridor would be Martin Way. And so it really has said, hey, if we're gonna accommodate this population, first of all, it needs to go in the urban growth areas. Second, it really needs to be focused around our corridors, our neighborhood centers, and our urban centers as well. Anything else you want to add on this one?
One more click here, and just getting back to being able to afford the infrastructure. You can imagine there's Clear Lake. See how far that is from Yelm?
Right. Got it.
Clear Lake down in the bottom part, and a high density in Midtown. You can just imagine the amount of roads that have to be built and maintained, the amount of wells to get water, septic systems out on the ground to accommodate the same, actually far fewer people than within that urban growth area. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Growth Management Act was all about, because we really can't afford to maintain urban levels of service.
Clearly developed by Weyerhaeuser way back when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a series of quarter to 2 acre lots,
Yeah.
which is kind of, suburban and
Yeah.
kind of urban, but no services,
No services.
So in the Sustainable Thurston process, the Elm School District reported that their buses travel 4,000 miles a day to pick up the kids and take them home. And, again, that's because you have to serve everybody out in the rural areas and can't be real efficient. Right. Now, I think we have a little video from TRPC from the Sustainable Thurston process.
I think this is actually Joe Tovar.
Oh, you're right. The Joe Tovar, this is kind of a focusing on the GMA and what it meant for Washington State when it was adopted. Thanks, Ron.
Oh, didn't go. Oh, there we go.
Impatient. 70s soundtrack, isn't it?
Nope, I was gonna try to. Sorry about that. Gosh, dang it. I'm trying to get the stuff off the screen. I'm sorry about that. Let's see. Let's try this again, but I'm gonna scoop forward.
We reversed,
It's a catchy tune.
From 4.1 million to 4.8 million. Urban sprawl crept into rural areas, farmland was being lost, transportation improvements were not keeping pace with growth. Many natural systems were being degraded, and there was confusion and conflict about the respective roles of counties and cities. A commission was appointed by the governor to study growth management programs in other states. The commission made a recommendation to the legislature, and many of these recommendations were adopted as the Growth Management Act of 1990. The GMA sets forth 14 planning goals to guide cities and counties in preparing and implementing comprehensive plans. These goals are not listed in any order of priority, so it is up to each local government to consider and weigh all of them in the planning process. In addition to goals to provide general guidance, the Act also includes a number of very specific requirements, which local plans and regulations must comply with. All 39 counties in the state and the cities in those counties must designate critical areas, which includes wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, critical aquifer recharge areas, frequently flooded areas, and geologically hazardous areas. City and county governments must also adopt regulations that will assure no net loss of the functions and values of these critical areas. In preparing these regulations, cities and counties are to use the best available science, either by undertaking original research or by relying on information that is available from state agencies. Forestry, agricultural, and mineral resource industries are key drivers of our state's economy. All counties and cities must designate such resource lands that have long-term commercial significance, and they must also adopt regulations to conserve those lands. Who must plan? Well, in addition to the duty to designate and protect critical areas and resource lands, 29 of the 39 counties shown on this map and the cities within those counties must fully plan under the Act, which means they have a number of additional requirements for how they plan. One of the most significant requirements for fully planning counties and their cities is to designate urban growth areas, or UGAs, with sufficient area and densities to accommodate the population that is projected for the coming 20 years. This map illustrates that at the countywide scale, all land that is not designated as urban or natural resource land is rural land. These are the three basic and mutually exclusive types of land in fully planning counties. The extent and shape of the UGA and many other regional decisions are made by the county after collaboration with its cities in development of what are called countywide planning policies, or CPPs. This regional policy framework ensures that city and county comprehensive plans are mutually consistent and that they work together to manage growth in a number of ways. In addition to being a mechanism for the county to designate urban growth areas, some counties have also used the CPPs to explicitly assign future annexation areas to adjacent cities. CPPs are also used to allocate 20-year population targets to each city to then include in their respective comprehensive plans. Some counties have chosen to also allocate employment targets to cities. The GMA requires that CPPs be adopted addressing the siting of public facilities of a countywide or statewide nature. These CPPs must also address the need for affordable housing and its distribution across the county. CPPs may also be adopted to address other issues that are regionally important. More than one contiguous county may choose to adopt multi-county planning policies, or MPPs. In the Central Puget Sound region, 4 counties and 82 cities have adopted Vision 2040, the Regional Growth Management and Economic Development Strategy. Vision 2040 constitutes MPPs for this region and addresses many topics, including climate change, high-capacity transit, regional growth centers, and the long-term metropolitan urban growth boundary. Each fully planning county and its cities must adopt a comprehensive plan with at least 5 required chapters, referred to in GMA language as elements. The land use element includes a future land use map. The map and accompanying text describes the general distribution, location, and extent of different land uses. This element describes population densities, building intensities, and estimates of future population growth. And it should also include policies for the protection of the quality of groundwater, management of stormwater runoff, and actions that are needed to mitigate pollution of waters of the state, including Puget Sound. The transportation element includes an inventory of existing transportation networks. It identifies existing needed improvements, as well as those improvements that will arise because of future growth. This element must address all modes of transportation, including transit, and it must include a bicycle and pedestrian component. The housing element includes an inventory of existing housing supply, describes how well supply meets current demand and future needs. This element should match future housing types and sizes with the economic means of current and future generations to secure housing. The utilities element considers the infrastructure needed to provide water and sewer capacity, power and telecommunications adequate to serve forecasted growth. The facilities and services described in this element include both those that are provided by the local jurisdiction or by others. The capital facilities element includes an inventory of roads, parks, public buildings, water supply and distribution systems, and wastewater collection and treatment systems. This element estimates the costs of providing these facilities over the life of the plan and must include detailed financing information for the coming 6 years. The local government cannot pay for identified facilities. It must reevaluate the plan until the needs and the ability to pay are in balance. In addition, a fully planning county must also adopt a rural element. The rural element should define rural land use patterns and policies to protect rural character. A city or county may also choose to include optional elements in the comprehensive plan that are tailored to address unique circumstances or priorities. Some have chosen to include elements such as parks and recreation, economic development, urban design, or sustainability. A number of local governments have also chosen to include at the beginning of their comprehensive plan an overarching vision statement. The vision statement sets forth core community values and principles and provides a description of the community's desired future. The GMA has specific requirements for what each element must or may contain. However, every element usually consists of text, maps, tables, photographs, or diagrams. The text portion of an element typically consists of goals and policies. Goals are aspirational statements of a high rank order, or they describe a desired future. An example might be maintain a sense of nature in a community. Policy statements, on the other hand, describe very specific actions or objectives needed to move the community in the direction of a stated goal. For example, a policy statement to serve the goal of maintaining a sense of nature might be something like measure the city's tree canopy, monitor its retention, and take measures that are needed to assure no net loss of tree canopy. Consistency is one of the key concepts in the Growth Management Act. GMA requires that the plan be both externally and internally consistent. External consistency means that your plan fits within the framework of state law, regional policies, and the plans of adjacent jurisdictions. In addition to complying with the goals and requirements of the GMA itself, a local comprehensive plan must also be consistent with any adopted countywide planning policies. The scope, manner, or degree of those regulations is determined by each jurisdiction. But in every case, we need to give some substance to policies and direction provided by the plan. Some facilities, such as airports, correctional facilities, or sewer treatment plants, are difficult to cite, but are essential for the well-being of a region and its communities. The GMA has established that such essential public facilities, or EPFs, cannot be precluded by comprehensive plans or regulations. Local governments must adopt processes to review EPFs. They may impose reasonable permit conditions on EPFs, provided that such processes or such conditions do not operate to effectively preclude siting or expansion of an EPF. The Department of Commerce is the state agency designated to assist communities planning under the Growth Management Act. Growth Management Services Unit of the Department of Commerce provides assistance on the technical and procedural aspects of the GMA and coordinates this plan and shortcut course. The Department of Commerce is the state agency designated to assist communities to plan under the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Services Unit of the Department of Commerce provides assistance on the technical procedural aspects of the GMA. Commerce does not certify local plans for development regulations. Instead, local plans and regulations are presumed to be valid upon adoption by the city or the county, and they may only be overturned if an appeal is filed and either the State Growth Hearing Board or a court determines that some aspect of that local action does not comply with the Growth Management Act.
Ryan's listening to music for the 8th time. Joe's been around a long time and is a legend in the planning field, but I've never heard a countywide planning policy called a CPP, and I've never heard a essential public facility called an EPF. So I think that must be an old school planner thing. Yeah. It's not in Zoom. It should be, click on Joe or your Joe. And then
Music.
escape it. You can start it over there. We did it.
Yay.
So we wanted just to take a pause there to see if there's any questions or anything that doesn't make sense.
So I have a question. There's this whole thing about utilities and telecommunication, and as we move more and more into the cyber world.
Mhm.
And those services are provided for the most part by private companies. How do you integrate the private company plan into the comprehensive plan for a city or for a county?
Yeah, that's a good question. They're actually required to be consistent with our, with the local growth management plan. So the
So they follow you rather than.
Yeah,
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 okay.
we work with, well, PSE is a great example. We work closely with them in developing the population projections where we think the population is gonna land in Lacey so that they can plan accordingly to keep their grid up to date and accommodate that growth. And something that wasn't talked about yet, but in tying that infrastructure to the population and the demand, the legislature also knew that things are expensive, and especially, big infrastructure, sewer treatment plants, water treatment plants, and electrical substations and gas, whatever. But so they also gave us a grace period. So we established a level of service for what we think is appropriate that the citizens demand. So there's a level of service for transportation corridors, for, you know, for our water utility, sewer utility. If a development or a growth proposal doesn't meet that now, as long as it's part of that 6-year capital facilities plan, and we financed and funded it, we can go ahead and approve that development, knowing that the infrastructure is following. So that was another one of those strong ties between infrastructure and the demand. And for the first time, you know, public works departments had to actually have a financing plan in place for when things had to grow. So that was good.
I think sometimes too, that's described as growth paying for growth.
Yeah, right.
Before that, you know, I think a lot of the reasons that the GMA came about was because growth prior to GMA did not pay for itself.
Yeah,
And so there was no mechanism for, you know, an impact from a development to be able to be to pay for itself.
so it fell back on the people that were already there.
The existing ratepayers, yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yep.
It's Alan. So let's say, and we work closely with utility companies like PSC, for example. Can they, if the city of Lacey decides that we need to expand the urban area into the meatloaf area, and can PSC then say they don't want to invest in that? And then
So that's a great question. Not from the utility standpoint, but those urban growth areas are pretty firm. They're established by those CPPs, that we don't call them CPPs, countywide planning policies, at the county level. And it is a very difficult process to get those changed unless you can show that you don't have enough area to accommodate all the growth within the 20-year growth period. And even then, expanding them, that's when all the utility planning would come in before that actually happened. So we're required to go out to them and do that coordination.
And interestingly enough, when you expand urban growth areas, the only, because it becomes at that point an urban growth area, it's not like we can go out and just take our city limits and expand them, right? Without them being in an urban growth area first. So the mechanism to establish an urban growth area or to expand an urban growth area is through the Board of County Commissioners. So even if, like, say the city council wanted to expand the city limits into the rural area, they couldn't do that. It would have to be first designated as an urban growth area approved by the Board of County Commissioners.
And make it through any appeal.
Right.
And Alan, the second part of that is we're not actually allowed to extend services that are urban in nature beyond the urban growth area. So we couldn't extend a water main out in, you know, north out towards Tolmie outside the UGA, because that could then spur suburban or urban growth outside that boundary. Did that help?
it did. Thank you very much.
We'll have more time to talk here. So one of the things we wanted to show was what the sprawl actually looked like in Thurston County when the Growth Management Act first came along. And so this was the population of Thurston County in 1950 with 45,000 residents. And you can see, you know, most of them were centered actually right around downtown Olympia, some out to, like, say, Boston Harbor area. And I'm not exactly sure what each dot represents in terms of population, but it is, you know, essentially where the population density was in 1950. And then if you look, here's 1990 with a population of 161,000, and we're almost double that now. We're close to 300,000. So, you know, we don't have this map for today, but this is what it looked like in 1990. And if you consider what those resource lands were, if you can see my cursor, you know, this is Capitol Forest. This is the area south of Clear Lake, and then this gap here that is in the meatloaf is actually JBLM. So that's the part of JBLM that if you've ever traveled Rainier Road between like South Lacey and Rainier,
Yeah.
you travel through that area. So that's not developable either. So you really look at how dispersed the population in 1990 was. And, the concerns were that you were, starting to think about providing services to all these, residents that were out in these areas, and then think about the transportation impacts that were associated with them. So, you had everybody that, were, living and commuting, places every day, and the impacts that was causing to, not only our utility infrastructure, but also our roadway infrastructure as well. And so it kind of cemented and brought home that how important it was to focus, when we talked about before, some of those goals as far as focusing those populations in urban growth areas and around our urban centers and corridors, how important that is, because the alternative is that this would be the continued land use pattern.
Right.
And, frankly, the horse was out of the barn a little bit when the GMA was adopted. So we were already seeing that sprawl outside what we now have as urban growth areas.
And that 1990 is really before a lot of the Northeast development took place, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you can see Northeast Lacey
might
is.
show that.
Yeah, that's actually part of our next slides, is to show you what some of that development looked
Okay,
like.
yeah.
But that's interesting. You can see, this was still in 1990, mostly warehouse or timberland.
Yeah.
It wasn't annexed into the city until like 1992, I think. So at that point, it was very little population that lived north of I-5 in the Lacey city limits. In fact, you can see more people lived out Johnson Point than lived in what's now the incorporated part of Lacey north of I-5.
Yeah.
You can still see though, you can see where kind of the oldest parts of Lacey are, but also you can see some of these older developments that are within our urban growth area. And that's why our urban growth area is so large, is because it goes basically all the way out to the Nisqually Bluff, because you can see in 1990, these neighborhoods, whether it was Tangle Wild or Thompson Place or the Meadows or Seasons or whatever, it was already existing by the time the Growth Management Act came around. And the idea was, in order to protect groundwater, because a lot of them were on septic systems, you needed to provide sewer to these areas. And as Grant mentioned, in order to provide sewer, you have to be in an urban growth area. And so that's why our urban growth area is so large, is because of the pre-existing amount of development on it and the need to provide it with utilities. Grant, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, it's kind of just how development takes place and how we've grown over the last 20 years, 30 years maybe. I told you I'm old. This is a 1954 aerial showing kind of the Hawks Prairie area going out towards Bud Inlet a little bit. In 1997, though, there was a large lot development out in the county that provided 119 single-family dwelling units on 5-acre parcels and took up 534 acres doing it. So that was that old development pattern that we were seeing up until the GMA. So kind of zooming into that Hawks Prairie area now. In 2001, this is what it looked like, and you could see there was some residential developments going in. The golf courses were in at that point, but there was not a lot of housing. There was just those couple subdivisions there that were developed. Fast forward to past that boom period that we had, changed significantly. So all the golf courses are filling around with housing. You can see a couple new developments up by the one golf course. The Campus Glen areas were starting to develop. Within those two subdivisions, there was 114 and 58 units on 35 acres and 10 acres respectively. And then keep fast forwarding, and we get to 2015 after the residential boom, and you can see we're pretty much built out on the single family, and how much land that took for those single family households. Ultimately, and you'll get the point here in a minute, but those three subdivisions that are highlighted there, Campus Glen and Campus Point. The Campus Glen was one more.
These two right here.
Those and the other one.
Campus Point and Campus Glen.
One more slide. So between them, those three developments accommodate 278 units on 55 acres of land. And the tree tract, the open space there in the Campus Glen is actually a wetland complex. So that was one of those things we were able to protect under the GMA after the adoption. So the three parcels down below are the Willamette Apartments and the two campus townhomes. So those are garden style apartments and townhome style development. They're rentals, unfortunately, at this point, but they're accommodating 283 units on just under 17 acres. So kind of hopefully driving home the point of what the GMA was all about. And we're seeing, you know, really a success story right now with the densification of Lacey. And it was all planned and expected, and this is where we're at. So in right now in Midtown, we have two residential developments going on that will provide 511 units on 7 acres. So that's kind of the pantheon of things, you know, we want to develop, and that's perfect because that's that walkable downtown corridor that the Sustainable Thurston Plan accommodated or anticipated.
And the alternative is that, like Grant had, you know, his first slide was like, if you take that and put it over a large amount of land, that land gets taken up just like that. And
In the meatloaf.
Yeah, in
Move it to
the
the
meatloaf,
meatloaf.
yeah. And then, like we've talked about, your services, everything, you know, your carbon footprint, everything goes up. So we'll show a little bit more here. Hopefully I can get the video to run. On the Sustainable Thurston effort. And really it's focused on, back then the buzzword was sustainability. So to keep in mind, this was like a 2013 process. I think more now it's become more refined, more looking at greenhouse gas emissions and those kinds of things. But it really, what this does is looks at, okay, what is the impact of a rural development versus a more urban development, especially when it comes to things like greenhouse gas emissions and transportation impacts.
And so if I could just jump in. A lot of the kind of the more detailed plans we're working on now, the climate action plan, the affordable housing plan, are really strongly rooted in the Sustainable Thurston Plan because it talks about all that stuff in a holistic measure. So a lot of these things we're doing now are recommendations out of that Sustainable Thurston Plan. And one of the things you'll see here that you'll hear me say ad nauseum, you'll probably get sick of it over the next 2 years, Rick, if he's watching. Is everything's related to everything. And so you can't talk about environment without talking about housing styles. You can't talk about transportation or infrastructure without talking about land use patterns and economics. So it really, you know, the Sustainable Thurston was a fun project because it tied everything together and laid some good groundwork for future work. I'm sorry, Aaron. That's good.
People everywhere are responsible for creating greenhouse gas emissions, the cause of climate change. But we differ place to place in the amount we create and the sources that create them. Here in Washington State, we are responsible for 100 million metric tons of greenhouse gases annually. That's of the nearly 6 billion metric tons of total emissions released in the United States each year. In most states, coal burned to generate electricity is the main source. But in Washington, most of our electricity is generated by hydroelectric dams. Also, the amount of miles driven per household is greater here than the United States average. That's why the most recent climate assessment by the Department of Ecology shows transportation as our #1 source of global warming emissions. And if you just look at transportation, the majority of that comes from gasoline burned in cars. This is one of the reasons why reducing our carbon footprint will depend on the choices we make planning for our communities. Decreasing our dependence on automobiles is our region's greatest opportunity for reducing our contribution of carbon emissions. But it's not just about making choices to change transportation habits. It's about land use, the way our communities are planned and built. It's important to understand that transportation and land use are inseparably linked. The places we live are the biggest indicator of how we'll choose to get around. Here's an example. To choose to walk to the store instead of drive, you need more than good sidewalks. You need somewhere close enough to walk to. For most Americans, 1/4 of a mile is the distance they're willing to walk for utility trips, like shopping. So the more places you can walk to within 1/4 of a mile, the greater the opportunity you have to walk to places you need to go. The quality and efficiency of public transit service is also dependent on land use. You're more likely to take the bus if it comes every 15 minutes and goes right to where you're headed. But 15-minute bus service only makes economic sense on routes that have a good mix of housing, jobs, and services at sufficient densities. Neighborhoods that average 10 housing units per acre, mixed with commercial areas with 12 employees per acre, are typically the minimum amount needed for transit-supportive neighborhoods. But even in dense urban areas, most people will continue to rely on driving for most of their travel needs. How far they have to drive and how efficiently they can travel is directly related to land use and how communities grow. Connected streets and designing buildings and streets with multiple transportation choices in mind will help make travel more efficient, with lower out-of-pocket costs for everyone. But how do we know this type of development is more efficient? Here's an example. A recent study combined total residential energy use from buildings and transportation from all across North America and combined each fuel measurement into one hard number, millions of BTUs per year. Using a common measure, it's easy to compare different types of energy. First, let's look at a single-family detached home in a conventional suburban development. The darker area at the top indicates the transportation energy used, while the lighter area at the bottom is building energy use. Now compare how much energy could be saved by using green, fuel-efficient vehicles, again, the darker part at the top of the bar, and green energy-saving building methods, indicated at the bottom of the bar. Now let's see the difference if we build similar homes in a transit-oriented neighborhood. Notice that building energy use in each bar did not change, but the top part shrinks because residents require much less energy to get around. Given the same scenario, but in single-family attached buildings, each building uses less energy because attached units are generally smaller and use less heating and cooling. Finally, let's look at a multifamily residence. Again, you see additional building energy savings because multifamily housing is inherently more efficient due to its compact nature. Here's an interesting point to be taken from this study. A household could live in a multifamily residence in a transit-oriented neighborhood and not take any steps toward reducing home energy use or go green, and they would, on average, use less energy in a year than a family who is taking steps to go green in any other type of development. In most cases, compact transit-oriented development automatically uses the least energy per person. And that's important to keep in mind, because we're not just planning for the people you see on the streets today. With Thurston County's prime location and high quality of life, we're expected to attract 170,000 new residents over the next 30 years. Let's look at a couple of options to consider how this growth could look. We're expecting 60,000 new homes in our urban area to accommodate future growth. If all those homes were conventional suburban development, it would fill the 97 square miles encompassed by every city and urban growth boundary in the region. The roads built to accommodate that kind of development would cause major traffic on rural roads and would make walking, biking, and transit unlikely or impossible for many of these new communities, causing long, frustrating commutes and high costs for pocketbooks as well as the environment. If those 60,000 homes were all built in mixed-use, transit-oriented communities at the minimum density to support efficient transit, they could all be done on our urban corridors in the existing urban areas. This would enable more of the current residents to expand their travel options, reducing everyone's car dependence, and the related travel expenses and carbon emissions that go along with it. Of course, the reality will be somewhere in between these two options, with a variety of densities in different places. The direction we head will be determined by the policy and land use priorities we set now, along with the market demand that drives housing and commercial development. The tools we have to shape our future are those that Thurston County communities have used to plan over the last 20 years of growth. The countywide planning policies, local comprehensive plans, and the regional transportation plan. By articulating the vision reflected in these plans, and by leveraging cooperation between jurisdictions, developers, and community groups, we have the opportunity to encourage walkable and transit-oriented neighborhoods, manage I-5 capacity, coordinate with regional partners like Joint Base Lewis-McChord, agree on meaningful metrics for evaluating success and meeting goals, and much, much more. Think globally, act locally, plan regionally.
See, they call them countywide planning policies.
Magic button to work here, whatever. Oh, there we go. Okay, so at this point, this was another spot for discussion. So obviously, we've been talking about how this kind of works in Washington State, but also how it gets applied locally to our Thurston region. I think that little video does a really good job of kind of setting forth why we really focus the growth on our urban corridors and near our urban centers so that we can preserve those open spaces in the rural county. Any feedback, anything that Plan Commission would like to ask questions on or provide feedback on?
I think it's difficult to keep that sort of global concept in your mind, because all of these requests to build whatever it is come one at a time in an isolated form. And no one, everyone wants development in that sense. And nobody wants to say no to a particular individual development. So we chip away at the trees, we chip away at the space. We don't look and say, is this an energy efficient kind of way to go about it? Does this one project tip us over the edge kind of thing? Because they come, in discrete packages, not as an overall plan. And I think it's very difficult to apply those concepts to each individual project and keep those goals in mind. I think it's not an easy process.
Well, I'd push back a little bit because that's what the comprehensive plan and the development regulations have set in place. So
Right.
if you're consistent with those,
You're
then,
okay.
then we're getting to
Yeah.
that global picture because we're developing the individual plans to accomplish what we've set out in the
Right, and
comprehensive plan.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
but I think that when the public looks at a project like the Hicks Lake project, and they see, however many trees getting hacked down because we're gonna build something that we desperately need, right? This concept isn't in the mind of the public. What they see is trees disappearing.
That's exactly the point that I was just gonna ask about, which is, it kind of reminds me of the, like the contradictory positions that people take. And like I've seen, polls where it says, Congress has like a 20% favorability rating, but an individual congressperson is like, everyone loves their congressman, they just all hate Congress. And it's kind of the same thing here, where I think everyone agrees we want to protect the rural areas, we want to focus growth, in the urban areas. But then when, you level 15 acres north of North Thurston High School, everyone is up in arms that we cut down some trees. And I wonder, is that just something that we have to live with, or is there a way that the community can be brought along on some of these to say, you know, this is
the start. I mean, that's what you guys are saying is exactly why we wanted to try to put everything in perspective in our role in it, which is the urban piece. So, you know, that's what we're starting with, because, you know, it's important to have that perspective. And it's very hard for people to understand, including ourselves sometimes, that, you know, we're only one leg of this GMA stool. And like everything's related to everything. Twice a minute.
And it's very hard to sell density to people.
right.
Very hard to sell density. And so if you can sell density with the concept that it actually costs you less, you know, and it does more for the community, but I don't know how to disseminate that. I mean, that second film strip actually was very useful and very sort of, you know, at a level that people can understand. So, you know, that I think that's the thing, that's the dilemma, you know. No, I don't want to be cheek by jowl with my neighbor, but yes, I understand we have to do that.
Other people, right?
Not me, yeah. other.
So the other big thing we wanted to kind of get to, and Ryan's going to start that piece of the project, is we're not in a silo here either. We're one piece of, you know, we're the urban component of the GMA in Thurston County, but we're not the only urban component. And climate change, transportation, affordable housing, those don't recognize city limit boundaries. We're all dealing with the same things, and we have to work together at a larger level, because the county's a big player in this stuff too, to go about it intelligently and not kind of in our little silos. So unless there's any other questions, that's a nice segue.
Another thought, and I'm guilty as charged, but there's a lot with the public transportation and the accessibility, but I still drive by buses that are 95% empty. And so, you know, it's just like, how do we can build it, but will they take the bus there? Or will they, you know, and so I think that's just, you know, maybe cultural norms, and we've got to work through those, and we'll hopefully get that to that place. But it still seems, and so I know we've had like transit come and talk to us, and I know like the free rides in the Martin Way corridor down to downtown and everything, but I'd be curious if we've got ridership up. Are we seeing developments make a difference in ridership? You know, the new bus routes. So I'd be kind of curious, you know. But
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
something great
very
to circle
West
back on.
Coast thing to drive your car.
yes, you know, I know nothing else really.
Yeah, I mean, trains and buses
You know,
are the way to get around everywhere else.
Change is hard,
Yeah.
but it's also sometimes slow. And, you know, if you talk to IT, and, you know, they're one of our primary partners in all this, is that, you know, they're getting the tools in place, and the development is coming that is starting to support the getting more people on the buses, because we're starting to recognize that we need the density along the corridors, and we're starting to get that density along the corridors that kind of feeds on itself. So it's not going to be happen overnight, but we're on the right trajectory, I think, for that
Well,
one.
you just look at the progression of the link up in Seattle and just how long that construction is going to take just to, you know, bring it a few miles south. And so just,
Yeah. I'm happy it's coming.
Ellen, Mark, any questions or discussion?
No, that was just a great presentation, and just very educational and a little bit mind-boggling how complicated it all is.
You think we're done, huh?
Yeah, so as Grant mentioned, we have a lot of different plans that cross jurisdictional boundaries, and you know, those are things like our regional transportation plan, the sustainability plan that we've been kind of focusing on a little bit here tonight, the Thurston climate mitigation plan, which, you know, sets forth what we're going to be doing as a region to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as our housing plans as well, and coordinating how we deal with the current homeless issues as well. You know, obviously those things cross a lot of our jurisdictional boundaries. And so, you know, we can't, a lot of times we get very in the weeds when it comes to Lacey specific concerns, but we need to understand that sometimes we're kind of in the same pot of soup as our neighbors and as our counties. When we think of things, specific actions, you know, maybe sometimes we need to think about how we can do them together rather than an individual jurisdiction.
And we also, we're trying to be very, at the kind of the staff level, very thoughtful about things that we can work on, because we don't have infinite resources that give it more bang for the buck, you know, because things are tied so closely together. There may be things that we can do in the affordable housing area that also helps in climate change. And so we want to identify those things that can make the biggest difference.
They have a dual goal, yeah.
Dual or even 3 or 4 transportation. I mean, you know, we can hopefully be really targeted just to try to achieve the goal. Back one. So kind of pulling, we dove way in, now we're going to pull back a little bit, or Ryan did, and talk about the region again and just how things all fit together. And like I think somebody said, Ryan, or I said earlier, where the opportunity, you know, you can see that the long-term timber and ag lands are really not changing. We haven't seen any difference out there really in the last 20 years. So that's kind of a set piece in this whole discussion. Where we can make the big difference is in the meatloaf. And that really means working with the county to, you know, their pledge in the Sustainable Thurston Plan was to move more people, of the new people, into the cities. They haven't adopted those plans and policies yet, but that's their piece. And we need to work with them to get that done. And that's where we're also going to see the biggest bang for our buck for tree retention and replanting and sequestration, which is why, you know, this is a heat map like we were looking at before, out at 2045 from Thurston Regional Planning Council. And this is based on just the growth patterns that are happening right now, not with that 95% shift. And you can see that other than JBLM there, we're gonna lose a lot of that, the rural lands, which is, you know, very, very inefficient form of development. And the growth management is all about choices. That's, you know, but we need to choose wisely too, and, you know, make sure growth pays for growth, even when it's rural growth. So kind of coming full circle, we'll be talking more about these things. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yep. So this is one of our last slides here, but we wanted to show you Thurston Regional Planning Council has done a report card as far as like how are we doing to meeting some of these goals, and one of them is as you recall, no more than 5% of all new housing in the rural area. And as you can see, that pink line there, that's 5%. Back to 2000, we had a lot of our housing going in that rural area, and it dipped down in 2010 and 2015, and now it's kind of starting to trend up a little bit. And so
Just to clarify, that's new housing?
that's correct. Yeah, new housing. So the concern is that we're kind of trending the wrong direction. We've gone down, but now we're starting to kind of trend a little bit up. But we're hopeful that because we've had so much construction in our urban growth areas, you know, things like our multifamily developments and those kinds of things, that this may start to reverse the trend that we've had. You know, and you can kind of show this on the next one too, which is the kind of inverse of the amount of housing going into the rural areas. This is urban housing within a 20-minute walk of a neighborhood center, urban corridor, those kinds of things. You can see that is the 2035 target. I think what did we say? It was 72%. It's starting to go that way, but extremely slow.
So in that first graph, you're not suggesting that the absolute numbers of things constructed in the area where we don't want them is going to go down. It's just that we are going to build more.
Right.
And so we'll move the percentage
will go down.
Yeah, okay.
again, this, based on this report card, you know, we've got so many residential units going in our midtown area as well as all the units going in downtown Olympia. That much like we expect the percentage of housing in the rural area to go down, we expect that the urban housing close to a 20-minute walk will go up.
Yeah.
But it's taken a long time. I mean, 2013 is almost 10 years, you know, and here we're finally starting to see some progress and some of those goals being met that were set out. And again, we're not achieving those goals. I guess we're starting to maybe, you know, we're hopeful that they're going to go in the right direction.
Well, we sort of lost 2 years in there somewhere. I think.
And this, remind me, that was 2018?
Yeah, so the last time, those were 2020 numbers. So yeah, they're a couple years old. So we're excited to see maybe in the next year or two what this will look like in terms of this report card.
Well, and a lot of those units that are like in Midtown and downtown, those are some of our most expensive rentals too, aren't they? So, you know, they're maybe got the walking, but they're not inexpensive.
They're not inexpensive, but they're, you know, kind of going back to that sustainable Thurston video. The actual cost of your rental is only one piece of the cost of living someplace. So, you know, and I don't have the graphs, but I've seen them someplace. We'll try to pull them out on what that kind of does, how that shifts when it's added up together.
I've just heard some of the rental rates in the downtown Olympia are quite extreme. So
I live downtown.
Well, some of them I knew that they had some, and maybe I was just hearing about the most expensive ones.
Yeah, no, it could be, but I paid $2,600 a month in rent. So, yeah, more than Brian's mortgage, I'm sure. So kind of coming full circle and tying things together, we didn't get into kind of the specifics that Alan was talking about last meeting on, you know, tree retention and the climate package and everything, because we wanted to give kind of our piece in this whole puzzle and let you know that we're going slow to go fast on some of this stuff because we really need the county and the other jurisdictions to catch up with us a little bit, particularly the county. Because specifically for the climate change, the carbon sequestration part, that's the first time I've said that correctly. They're the biggest, you know, they're the 800-pound gorilla at the table. They're the ones who have the most land and the most ability to make change there. So we don't want to start doing our codes right now and then wind up having to redo them after we have this regional discussion on climate change. Yeah, I think that was about it. And the slide up there is just the intent of the Growth Management Act. So even back in 1990, I think that resonates pretty well even today. And it's held up pretty well. It's, you know, we're getting there.
It's really good.
That was good.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Are there any announcements or communications from anyone that we need to hear? Okay. We did not approve the minutes, my fault.
Yes, we did. Yeah,
Did
as
we?
part of the agenda consent.
Oh, never mind. Skip that. We did approve the minutes apparently. Okay, the next meeting is May 17th in this August hall, I assume, unless things change.
Yep, and so this will be our first in-person public hearing. So
Whoa.
we'll have a public hearing on the stormwater manual update. I'll kind of figure out how that'll work. My understanding is that we will stay back here, and if anybody comes to testify, they can actually stand up and they can kind of come in
Be
this
over there,
area
yeah.
to get picked up on the microphone, because that way we can stay in this configuration without having to, you know, do things with other cameras around, like, you know, we used to have
Yeah, that gets
have
a
them
little
up at the front here, and we're just gonna have it back here. This will be kind of our test case on that.
How was Alan and Mark, how is the sound for you guys? Are we coming through okay?
Good.
Great.
Good.
And then we'll have more discussion. We also have on the agenda next week or in 2 weeks, an overview of the Martin Way corridor project
Oh, good.
that also will be very topical in terms of what we're doing in terms of transportation and land use recommendations along the Martin Way corridor. So very, very topical segment there. So that'll be good.
All right. We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, Mark.